It is important for us to understand that this is real.
Yeah.
There were really passengers on those flights. There were really members of families. These are people's actual lives. It's not a joke that planes flew into towers. It's not a joke. It says something that is wrong with us in this country. It speaks of a moral decline that this has become a joke for us. Thanks for checking out Culture Proof. I'm Nikki.
And I'm Will.
And today our country is looking back at 23 years since the attack of 9/11. And I read an interesting article out from Rolling Stone magazine that I thought, wow, what does joking about 9/11 and just being perpetually online say about where we are as a culture? And I want to talk a little bit about that today. But first, let me say thanks so much to BJU Press Homeschool for making the Culture Proof podcast possible. They are the premier sponsors of our podcast, and we're grateful for them. We're also grateful for their help in educating our kids. We trust BJU Press Homeschool to come alongside us and not work against our efforts. We believe that you can trust them too. Check them out, bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com. All of your educational needs, they've got you covered. Check them out, bjupresshomeschool.com. Let them know that the Addisons sent you. All right, Will the Great,
Yes.
Do you remember where you were 23 years ago, September 11th, 2001? Can you recall that in your mind when you learned that there was something happening in our country?
Yeah, I was in Lafayette, Louisiana, at University of Louisiana, Lafayette. And yeah, I think I remember coming back from either a meeting or it was early. It was something, and then I just remember kind of like this a little commotion, like something was going on.
Yeah.
We didn't have TV, so I didn't know immediately, but the word spread pretty quickly.
My goodness.
What was happening, and initially I was like, really? It was just kind of like surreal. But as things begin to develop, you had one plane hit, and then another plane. It was like, man, what's going on here? So yeah, I remember pretty vividly being on the campus there in Lafayette and kind of just learning piece by piece what was happening.
Yeah, I remember I was a student. I was actually still in college. I was 22 years old, and I remember just kind of what you're describing, walking around on campus and people saying things like it's amazing how information has changed in the way that it gets disseminated. I believe today it would have looked like everyone on their phones, everyone just like heads down in the phone and keeping up minute by minute. But for us, it was, you hear people saying, did you hear? We got attacked. There's been an attack in our country. And I remember trying to get to the student union because there are TVs in the student union. And I remember just trying to see what was going on, like what was happening, and really not being able to make sense of it until, for me, I was able to sit down, and this is probably bad, but just consume like hours of information. Like the reports kept coming out, and then you started rewatching the planes go into the Twin Towers, and man, it just, I remember the feeling of, I don't know, like there is a certain, I think to be an American, you feel, let me say this the right way. There is a safety that you take for granted. You grow up knowing that you are in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And you read your history books about other countries that are not so fortunate. You read even how, in the history of our country, how brave men, went into battle to defend our sovereignty. And those are the things that really characterize how you think about your country. You just think, we board planes, we fly here and there, and we don't think about it. We don't think about that there are threats among us, or that there could be threats among us. And what 9/11 did was, I feel, and I'm curious to know what you think, it robbed us of that feeling of security. And in exchange for that, you all of a sudden started to think about what if, can we fly again? Like,
Yeah.
these are the things
Yeah.
that never entered your mind, but all of a sudden they were entering your mind.
Right. It definitely brought about a soberness and, just kind of looking at things as like, okay, from here on out, a lot of things going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Mm-hmm.
it was one of those marker moments.
Yes.
And, I just remember just kind of being unsure, like what was going to happen next. Were there going to be more attacks?
Is it
Like,
over?
is it
Like, yeah,
over?
yeah,
We know that there was a third plane, like, so,
yeah.
at that moment, I was like, man, two, okay. And then you hear about a third
Yep.
one, and then it's
Yep.
kind of like, man, what's going on? Are they going
Yes.
to be in different parts of the country now? Like, is this
And then the
it? Or
fourth one. That's right. Like,
so
and yeah.
it's crazy, initially the thoughts, and I think there was a soberness across the nation,
Yes.
even a turning towards God,
Yes. Oh, I
where you had
remember it.
churches packed and things like that, which faded away,
Yeah. Oh
but
my goodness.
it was a moment of like, okay, all
Yeah.
right, we are not as secure as we think that we are.
Yeah. There was almost a feeling of like a sense of sort of like an apocalyptic
Mm,
happening where, especially some of the images that, just ran across our eyes almost incessantly, where you've got people covered in the ash running,
mhm.
the pictures of people just like somersaulting from buildings.
Man,
Like,
it's crazy,
I just remember feeling like, that can't be real. Like, is that real?
Yeah,
And indeed it was real.
right.
And I'm saying all of this and inviting even our listeners to kind of come back with us
Mhm,
to September 11th, 2001, because we now live in a time where there is a generation of kids who are young adults, okay,
mhm,
who are so detached from that
mhm,
that it's just meme worthy. Like 9/11 just becomes a meme of our society, a meme of our culture.
mm.
And, there are those who would like to say, well, it's because this generation didn't live it. Well, I didn't live World War II, but I don't think it's a joke.
Right, and I was gonna say that that's not something that I feel like is a feature of, other generations understanding, like you say, World War II,
Hmm.
Vietnam, like,
Yes, exactly.
just the Korean War. Like,
Yeah.
you didn't joke about that stuff. One of the pictures that stick out to me as far as 9/11 was President Bush in that classroom.
In Florida.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with those
Hmm.
kids. But there was just a lot of images that came out, a lot of, different things that were said. And it was a sobering and a
Yeah,
serious
man.
moment. And so now to talk about like memes and things like that, it's like what's going on?
Yeah. And that's what we want to talk about. And I want to offer some reasons, or maybe I want to suggest what I think it says about us as a culture, that 9/11 has become memeable.
Mm,
And even so, without the fear of being criticized over it. I think that's
wow.
the big thing, because
Yeah.
even, immediately following 9/11, you had some comedians who made jokes, but they were, as it were then,
Hmm.
canceled. Like, there
Mm,
are people who were like, no, we are not
mm,
joking about 9/11. Like, we're
right.
just not doing that. That upset the fabric of our culture. It upset our society. It said to us, you are not as safe as you think you are. You are not as big and as bold and as brave
Mm,
as you think you are. And so don't joke about it. But here we are 23 years later, and it is the stuff of like, my goodness, like, put a picture on it and use it to describe your life. Like,
mm, mhm,
but I think it says something about where we are as a culture. Let me read a little bit from this Rolling Stone piece, which is the piece that got me thinking
mhm,
about this. And the piece is how 9/11 became one of the internet's most popular memes.
mm,
All right, here is how it begins. Olivia, a 21-year-old college student, was sitting in an English class at her Minnesota school last week when her professor began talking about the challenges in writing about traumatic events. But when he used 9/11 as an example and described to the class how hectic things seemed that day, she realized just how she felt, or rather didn't feel, about the attacks.
mm.
Quote, being terminally online is wild, because someone mentioned 9/11 in my class today, and I genuinely forgot that not everyone thinks it's funny now. She
Mm.
wrote this on X, and it was favorited more than 10,000 times. Quote, I had this moment of realization within myself that this should be having an impact on me, and it weirdly isn't. This is what Olivia recalled in her sit down interview or her response to Rolling Stone. She also, I think it's important to note, asked that her last name not be used in this piece because, the internet has a very long memory. And so it's possible that some people do not think that 9/11 is a joke and do not think that we should be emotionally detached from it. She has since, by the way, removed that tweet, maybe thinking things over, maybe having a conversation with her parents. I don't know. But this is what she said, quote, "I think it's been watered down a lot for our generation. It's a moment of levity, this very heavy moment. For our generation, it's very almost casual." Okay.
Wow.
Olivia is not alone. Rolling Stone piece continues. To be on social media in 2024 is to be swimming in jokes and memes about 9/11. Things that might once have been whispered among friends are now shared by meme accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers. On TikTok, videos contrasting the year 2024 with 2001, often ending with someone reacting to the planes hitting towers, frequently went viral. While on X, a famous photo of President George W. Bush being informed by his chief of staff that the U.S. was under attack is now frequently used to mock everything from Ozempic to J.D. Vance to the Drake-Kendrick Lamar beef. Want to be overly dramatic about a minor event in your life? Why not use a GIF or a video with Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner, standing in a sea of American flags, solemnly saying 9/11? Or you could keep things simple and just say, "This was my 9/11." Now, remember, the context of that is that you have something that is trivial, but you are trying to dramatize that thing. And so then you would say, "This is my 9/11." Just a little bit more from this Rolling Stone piece. As the world marks 23 years since the attacks, the ways in which people talk and joke about the tragedy have evolved dramatically, especially on the internet. For some people, the passage of time has reduced the trauma associated with it and allowed them to feel more comfortable using humor to process the last 2 decades in a different light. For other younger Gen Z internet users, Black comedy is a tool they use to discuss something they've only ever read about in history books. Social media, which didn't exist at the time of the attacks, has also given rise to a digital space for these jokes that is steeped in irony. It rewards outrageous humor and it encourages others to join the trend. The few 9/11 memes last decade mostly involved mocking conspiracy theorists such as jet fuel can't melt steel beams or Bush did 9/11, both of which surged in usage around 2015. These gags drew their shock value humor by juxtaposing something innocent with something extreme. Now, I do want to say this because the Rolling Stone piece reminds us that immediately following 9/11, people just didn't joke about it. And so I want to make sure to include that and then go back over to you to kind of get your response to this, your immediate take on it. The article continues here. Obviously, it wasn't always this way. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, comedy and popular culture was particularly fraught. Gilbert Gottfried famously bombed when he quipped to a New York audience just weeks after the attack, quote, "I have to leave early tonight. I have a flight to California. I can't get a direct flight. They said I have to stop at the Empire State Building first." Gottfried later said, "I don't think anyone lost an audience bigger than I did at that point." Bill Maher said he was canceled, or Bill Maher's show Politically Incorrect was canceled soon after he made comments about the terrorists not being cowards. Conversely, when he returned to air, Jon Stewart used his monologue on The Daily Show to deliver a somber message full of grief and pain, as did David Letterman. And what's the point? The point is that even as the comedian saw that, no, judgment is going to be swift, okay, they realize, hey, this is not something that you joke about. But here we are 23 years later, and it is not the same. What has changed? What do you see in this?
Well, I think there can be something said about not being removed from that. But
Hmm.
we already talked about, other generations didn't joke about the wars that took place before, them that they were not around for. So that's
Hmm.
one point. That could be something there, because if you're close to the moment and you saw the images and things like that, as far as happening in real time, then I think it has a different effect than someone who was not born at the time or whatever.
Hmm.
But I also think there's a different, and this is gradually increasing feel for the nation. Like I think we don't have the same type of maybe patriotic feelings
Yes, man, that's
concerning the United
exactly
States
what
of
I was thinking.
America. And I
Yeah.
think as the generations go forward, they're not, I don't think there are many parents teaching their children about the greatness of America. I
Hmm.
think, I know in the schools they're not getting it. Things have been moored how this country is a bad country,
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
so many systems to keep people down and stuff like that. So I think there's a different feel in how I think young people feel about the United States of America. So it would be easier to joke and to put out memes about
Right.
serious
Come on.
things, than ever before.
Man, that is almost immediately what I thought about. I thought, we have such a diminished view of the land that we live in, and we have so devalued the country in the way that our history classes are taught, in the way that we have uplifted certain aspects of social activism
Mhm.
versus others. And this begins to tell a generation what to think
Yeah.
about the land that they live in. It tells them what to think about what we value. Is it good to say something, that's as American as apple pie? Well, if you think that America is bad, then keep your pie. Like, don't
Right.
use that reference.
Right.
And I think that's what we're seeing in our country. So as I was thinking about this, I thought, maybe it's important for us to kind of go back to September 11th.
Mhm.
And we just kind of did that in from our own perspective, where we were thinking about it through our lens. But what about the historians? What do they write about 9/11 that I think it's important not only for us to remember, but for us as parents to make sure that our kids understand
Mm.
what happened in this country and why that should matter to us forever. So I want to share a little bit of this piece that I read. This was from several years ago, kind of offering a timeline of the September 11th terrorist attacks. And I thought, man, it's just so chilling as you go through the timeline,
Mm.
as you look at what happened, and then you couple that with remembering where you were and, 22, you know what I mean? 22, unmarried, still in college. Like, but then again, I will say, but still not like thinking that this is something that we shouldn't care about. I
Right.
think there was an esteem for our country that just doesn't exist today.
Mhm.
So anyway, this piece, September 11th, the day that defined the beginning of the 21st century for Americans. On September 11th, 2001, 2,977 people were killed in the deadliest terrorist attacks in American history. The moment shocked the nation. Two planes, hijacked by Islamic jihadists vowing death to all Americans, plowed into both towers at the World Trade Center in New York. Another plane was flown into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And a fourth plane, presumably headed for the White House or the Capitol, was heroically diverted by passengers and ended up crashing in an empty field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. After reports of the first plane hitting the North Tower, millions watched the second plane hit the South Tower on live television. Oh my goodness. It was a terrifying, startling, and humbling event for the country. The 9/11 attacks were the deadliest on American soil since the shock attack at Pearl Harbor 60 years before. And the sense of outrage was reminiscent of that moment. The attacks in New York occurred in the country's busiest city on a busy workday, and the staggered nature of the attacks meant that news footage captured almost everything as it happened, ensuring that millions of Americans saw the events precisely as they unfolded. So let's look at this. On September 11, 2001, 5:45 a.m., Mohammed Atta and Abdul Aziz Al Omari, two of the intended hijackers, passed through security at the Portland International Jetport in Maine. They board a commuter flight to Boston Logan International Airport. Then they board American Airlines Flight 11. At 7:59 a.m., Flight 11 takes off from Boston, headed to Los Angeles, California. There's 76 passengers, 11 crew members, and 5 hijackers on board. At 8:15 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 takes off from Boston, also headed for Los Angeles. There are 51 passengers, 9 crew members, and 5 hijackers on board. 8:19 a.m., a flight attendant on Flight 11, Betty Ann Ong, alerts ground personnel that a hijacking is underway and that the cockpit is unreachable. At 8:20 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 takes off from Dulles outside of Washington, D.C., headed for Los Angeles. There are 53 passengers, 6 crew members, and 5 hijackers on board. 8:24 a.m., Mohammed Atta, a hijacker on Flight 11, unintentionally alerts air controllers in Boston to the attack. He meant to press the button that allowed him to talk to the passengers on his flight. At 8:37 a.m., after hearing the broadcast from Atta on Flight 11, Boston Air Traffic Control alerts the U.S. Air Force's Northeast Defense Sector, who then mobilized the Air National Guard to follow the plane. At 8:42 a.m., United Flight 93 takes off from Newark, New Jersey after a delay due to routine traffic. It was headed for San Francisco, California. There are 33 passengers, 7 crew members, and 4 hijackers on board. At 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 crashes into the World Trade Center's North Tower. All passengers aboard are instantly killed, and employees of the World Trade Center are trapped above the 91st floor. Why am I going through this? Because when we have a generation of kids who think this is a meme, right? This is a joke.
Wow.
It is important for us to understand that this is real.
Yeah.
There were really passengers on those flights. There were really members of families.
Mm-hmm.
These are people's actual lives. It's not a joke that planes flew into towers. It's not a joke. It says something that is wrong with us in this country. It speaks of a moral decline that this has become a joke for us.
Yeah, definitely a serious moment. And you reading the timeline here, man, it gives that feel again of like, wow, this stuff happened, and it happened in a way that was terror.
It was terror.
And just bringing back those images of seeing those planes fly into those buildings, and people jumping out of the windows. Like, man, this was a real deal tragedy. And to think now that it's being made into memes is just disgusting.
Yeah. And that people don't feel any shame.
Yeah.
There's no shame about it. We'll continue with the timeline. At 9:03 a.m., Flight 175 crashes into the World Trade Center's South Tower. All passengers aboard are killed instantly, and so are an unknown number of people in the tower. At 9:05 a.m., President George W. Bush, in an elementary school classroom in Florida, is informed about the hit on the second tower. His chief of staff, Andrew Card, whispers the chilling news into the president's ear. Bush later wrote about his response, quote, "I made the decision not to jump up immediately and leave the classroom. I didn't want to rattle the kids. I wanted to project a sense of calm. I had been in enough crises to know that the first thing the leader has to do is to project calm." At 9:28 a.m., hijackers attack on Flight 93. Keep up with this timeline here, okay? 9:05, the president is informed. 9:28 a.m., the hijackers attack on Flight 93. At 9:37 a.m., Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon. All passengers aboard are instantly killed, and so are 125 civilian and military personnel in the building. 9:45 a.m., U.S. airspace is shut down under Operation Yellow Ribbon. All civilian aircraft are ordered to land at the nearest airport. 9:55 a.m., Air Force One with President George W. Bush aboard takes off from Florida. At 9:57 a.m., passengers aboard Flight 93 begin to run up toward the cockpit. This is the let's roll. This is the let's roll. This is important because the observations that I want to make about where we are, this part here is super important. Okay. 9:57 a.m., passengers aboard Flight 93 begin to run up toward the cockpit. Jara, the pilot, begins to roll the plane back and forth in an attempt to destabilize the revolt. Can you get a picture of this? That you've got passengers on this plane and you've got some brave men and women who decide, look, we don't know what's going to happen. We could either sit here and just let it happen, or we could do what we can do to take this plane down. And as they are attempting to do that, the terrorist pilot is rolling the plane back and forth. Think about as you are a passenger on this plane. It's not a joke.
Right.
It's not a joke, right? And the fact that we have gotten to a place where it's just a meme. You know, I'm not trying to throw shade here, but looking back on, I'm thinking about a rapper, a Christian rapper who's got a label, got an image where he's doing it's the President Bush notification, right? It's like, this was a serious moment. And again, I'm not like on a witch hunt. I'm just saying, when you stop and think about what happened on this day, yes, there are some aspects of it that are iconic. And I can see people believing that this captures a feeling.
Yeah.
But joking about it, making light of it, calling your mini crises your 9/11. Oh my goodness. I think, to the families who suffered and are still suffering, right? Yeah. Because loss doesn't end after a certain time frame. It doesn't have like an expiration date where you no longer get to grieve and you should just be over that by now, right? Yeah. No, loss kind of lingers a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, there were many who died. There were first responders who died.
Come on.
Who ran into those buildings to try to save people. I mean, this was a big deal, but I think it has something to do also, with parenting and the home, like these type of things. For instance, the boomers and people like that, they would tell about, man, and you heard the stories about, going on the beaches and being shot down.
That's right.
So that was a reverence, like, man, these men, like, went in. And so I think when there's not that, even in the homes, like, hey, this is a big moment and this is what happened, then there's just kind of just a carelessness about it. Just like, okay, that's funny. So I think that has a part to play as well.
No, I agree with you 100%. I do believe that not fostering the feeling of bravery and a loyalty and allegiance to your country, this kind of open borders generation, I think leads to the type of apathy that you are describing. Again, just want to round this out. 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. At 10:02 a.m., Flight 93 plows into an empty field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Although its ultimate target is unknown, it was likely headed for either the White House or the U.S. Capitol. At 10:18 a.m., President Bush authorizes any non-grounded planes to be shot down. At that time, all 4 hijacked planes had already crashed, but the president's team was operating under the impression that Flight 93 was still in the air. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. At 10:53 a.m., Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld orders the U.S. military to move to a higher state of alert, going to DEFCON 3. I'm going to leave it there. What happens after that, the press conferences, the president being flown to a secure bunker in Nebraska, all of these things shaped where we were. And, the looks of people running away screaming and dumping bottles of water on their faces. They're trying to live.
Streets with that dust and all that stuff. I mean, it
looked like an apocalypse. It looked like some sort
this
of
is America. Like it was one of those things where you're like, man, this happened here.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And again, just in case we think that what happened in the past stays in the past, the effects of this attack on our country are still felt today. And let me just round out looking at the history of this and how this affects us even today. The 9/11 attacks resulted in changes to the federal government and an expansion of executive power. A new cabinet department, the Department of Homeland Security, was created, and the intelligence community was consolidated under the Director of National Intelligence to improve coordination. But then there were also the health issues that were the result of these planes flying into these buildings. There were domestic long-term effects. This article points out thousands of people struggle with cancer, and lasting chronic health problems relating to the toxicity from Ground Zero, the site where the Twin Towers used to stand. Listen, we have an issue. And I thought, and just quickly, I'll run through these. As I was reading this piece, kind of looking back at a timeline and considering the Rolling Stone article, I thought of 5 things that it tells us about where we are as a culture, that it's become a joke. Number 1, I think it tells us that genuine compassion and empathy have been replaced with cultural emotional control, because you can feel a quote unquote empathy, but it is an empathy that is scripted. We have told you what you can feel, and then you can feel that freely. But genuine compassion and genuine empathy are not allowed in today's culture. Number 2, I believe that memeing 9/11 tells us that genuine love for country is at least controversial and at most bigoted. So you don't get to love your country. You don't get to care that there was an attack on your country. Number 3, it tells us that genuine heroes are so few and far between, we don't know how to honor them.
Wow.
We don't know what real bravery looks like. We don't know what it means to be a person who says, let's roll. Like, we can either sit here like ducks, or we can get up and we can do something. We can do something. So that is a problem. Number 4, I believe that it tells us that a genuine value for life is nearly all gone in this country. What it means to number the people who lost their lives, what it means to look at people, just falling from buildings because they believe that is their only means of safety, that they've got to just jump for it, to be disoriented to the point where you are just throwing your body from a building because you think that is the safe thing to do. And number 5, I believe that it tells us that genuine courage has been lost to the incessant, generations-long call for passivity. There's no courage in our country. We don't understand what it is to stand up and do the brave thing, because we have been made a nation of pacifists. We've been made a nation of apathetic individuals who want to be coddled and want to be loved and affirmed all the time. Everything I do is right. And so we don't know what real courage looks like. We don't know. And for that, looking back 23 years, I grieve on 9/11.
Yeah. There's actually hate being taught, to hate the nation, to disdain what America stands for. And that's one of the things that when we look at the things that are being taught in the schools and say, no, that's wrong. They're teaching something that will actually hurt the country. That's why it's so important. And I feel like, man, we have to, as parents, do a better job at, informing our children about heroes, about things that has happened that's good in the country. There's a whole conversation even about the word nationalism and, it being like a bad word, when it simply means, to really value your country.
Yes.
Like to really. And so it's one of those things, man. I think, as time goes on, there will be more and more of a disdain for America and the things that have built America. At the same time, we have to make sure that we're not praising the country. We're not saying that the country is this or that, but this is a great nation that the Lord has allowed us to be a part of, to be born in. And we should, highlight those things that would be courageous, heroic, and not make light of things like 9/11. That, man, real serious, things that happen in this nation. So,
our culture has lost its ability to appreciate those who've got the let's roll composition among us. I guess in a way, the Todd Beamers of our society, of our culture, because we don't value that. Our culture does not value life. Our culture does not value the country that gives it the freedom to be able to go off the rails. And that's tragic. That's a shame. So we resist that. We stand against it. We say on today, September 11th, we remember what happened in our country, and we mourn with those who mourn. And we are offended that there were people who thought they could breach our borders to destroy our country. Like, I believe that nations are God's sovereign idea. And so that should be important to us because it's important to God. He's the one who carved out the nations. God rules and reigns supreme over that. We can't ignore it. All right. When we resist those cultural trends that rival the truth, we remain culture proof. Until next time, Lord willing.
God bless.